Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, April 16th, and with the NBA playoffs just about to start, we have the first play-in tournament games taking place tonight. We are going to do a little awards show for the 2023-24 NBA season, which has officially come to an end. So we're going to be handing out all the individual player awards, as well as all NBA, all defense, and all rookie teams. We are also additionally going to be giving an update on the Giannis Antetokounmpo calf injury that is, and how his status looks headed into the playoffs as the Bucks are set to tip off against the Pacers this upcoming weekend. So we will be diving into all of that. But before we get into that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Help us grow this channel. Additionally, for any of our live viewers, if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Definitely be sure to leave some comments in the comment section to make this show as interactive as possible. We are going to be starting off the show today by handing out the individual NBA awards from MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, and everything in between. So without further ado, getting into the first award here in the Most Valuable Player. This has been definitely a contentious race in terms of social media, maybe not quite as toxic as Joel Embiid put it a few weeks ago in terms of the recent set of years. In large part, that's due to the fact that we don't have Jokic and Embiid fans both sort of duking it out for who should be the most deserving. I feel like there's just that little bit of a rivalry considering two of the best centers, not just in the current NBA, but definitely Hall of Famers to come here. But on that note a little bit, I am going to go with Nikola Jokic as the MVP this season. He is just, in my eyes, definitively the best player in the NBA. And there is a lot of talent on that Denver roster, but Jokic is the identity of that team. You can see it from the way that the entirety of the group plays, and the system that is run around Jokic, I believe, is just so much easier to thrive in. We've seen these players that play amongst him be able to put together some of the best years of their career. Aaron Gordon is case in point A, where he was this promising young player in Orlando for a handful of years, but ultimately the fact that his outside shot wasn't the most reliable, and he sort of struggled to find his spots in terms of scoring. He comes in with Jokic, and he is able to capitalize, make the most out of his level of athleticism and his IQ, where it's those backdoor cuts when he's on the baseline, and Jokic working from the post is able to sort of just read the defense based off of how many guys are they going to send at me, and am I going to have that open passing lane to Gordon. And sometimes the passing lane isn't even all that open, but he still makes the pass regardless. It's more than just Gordon, though. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who is a very solid role player, won a championship with the Lakers, but has really been able to thrive in this system. And then you see the way that the rookies just understand, rookies and young players in general have been able to sort of just slide into this system where you have Christian Brown, the way that he was able to impact the playoff run last year, again with those backdoor cuts, just the entire team understanding to be as active as possible, and Jokic is going to make plays. It causes all types of disruption for opposing defenses forces an enhanced level of maturity and awareness on the other end. And again, lots of talent on the Denver roster, but in large part, they are a little bit Jokic or bust. You see it every time when Jokic is not on the court out there. That's why he has an on-off differential of plus 23.7, because anytime he goes to the bench, there's just not that same level of production. And Jamal Murray, of course, is a phenomenal sort of Robin to Jokic being the Batman, but at the same time, he's been dealing with injuries through the past couple seasons. Only played, I believe it was 58 games this season. And, you know, down the stretch of the season, we saw how much it was Jokic reliant. And again, I do think that in large part, because of last year, the Nuggets sort of coasted their way into the postseason as opposed to actually trying down the stretch. That did hurt Jokic's MVP chances. So he could very well have been a 4-time straight MVP if things broke differently last year. Not saying Joel Embiid wasn't deserving of it necessarily, but I just think that Jokic is the best player in the NBA. He is on one of the best teams in the league this year, tied for the second most wins in the NBA this season. And, you know, I just don't think there's too much of an argument against it. Now, the runner-ups, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic, I would probably have it in that order. I don't feel extremely strongly. I do know that a ton of people are on the Luka Doncic train, which is absolutely fair. The counting stats that he put up this season are remarkable, but at the same time, I do feel like there is, when you look at the situation surrounding the Nuggets versus the Mavericks, there's some level at least of Luka has this other player he can really default on and make his way, and that being Kyrie. We finally got an improved Kyrie season. He played about just as much as Jamal Murray did as well in that sense. But Kyrie is able to create down the stretch and carry these big moments by himself. I do feel like, not to diminish Jamal Murray because he is an incredible player, but injuries have really gotten in the way of him reaching his full potential, and it does feel like even in his highest moments, Jokic is involved in the play one way or another, whether it be the screen or the extra attention that he is drawing down low. I just think it's hard to go against Jokic in this type of a situation. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, also an incredible season. Again, I actually had him number 2 on my ballot, at least, based off of being able to deliver a 57-win season after a year in which they were in the play-in tournament. I believe they finished 10th overall in the West. I don't have that number in front of me at the moment, but a very young team, the youngest team to ever clinch the 1 seed in the Western Conference, and the Thunder absolutely have a team that is set to succeed in the regular season. You have Chet Holmgren playing all 82 games, Jalen Williams in the running for most improved player, so it's not like he's on an island by himself necessarily either, but he was the main catalyst, both with his massive amounts of 30-point games that he put out there on the court, as well as the level of defense that he plays that does get a little bit overlooked in his game as a whole. But I just mentioned Chet Holmgren. On to the Rookie of the Year. Not that I'm going with Chet on this one. It's Victor Wembanyama. There's really not much of a debate here in my eyes. Chet had a season fully capable of winning Rookie of the Year if it were just about any other season, but he's competing against one of the generational rookie seasons that we have seen. I did see a stat in terms of, it was the synergy report or something along those lines, and the impact that he had on the team. It was the synergy player impact statistic, for whatever that means. To be honest, I didn't look too much into it, but he actually graded as the number 1 rookie of the last 5 seasons, given a year in that category. Again, take that for what you will, But it's Wemby. It is, it was a little bit more of a race in the first couple months when Wembanyama was a little bit shakier, but then Wemby just took his game to another level when the new year hit, and he has not looked back since then. I do want to briefly acknowledge Brandon Miller for the rookie season he had. Would be third on my my Rookie of the Year ballot here. He's been very much overshadowed by Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren, but he had a really nice rookie season, and I myself criticized the Hornets a little bit because I thought that they were taking Miller over Scoot Henderson more so from a fit perspective, and clearly it was more in the fact that Brandon Miller is a legitimately great player and he should be for the time to come. Still not fully out on Scoot, but Brandon Miller has seemingly proven that he can have even a higher ceiling than I initially anticipated, with him being able to put in work on both ends. He takes a lot of pride on the defensive side of the ball on a roster in the Charlotte Hornets that didn't really have much pride in any aspect of the game, frankly, which is harsh, but also it was a pretty miserable year in Charlotte once again. He does, and it's a little ironic because a lot of people criticize him because of the fact that he is a big fan of Paul George, but I do think he plays a lot like Paul George, and again, those prime Paul George years when he was on Indiana, the two-way ability, and even, Paul George was a finalist for MVP when he was with Oklahoma City as well at one point. So Brandon Miller, I think, has a ton of room to grow, but again, as far as the Rookie of the Year race, it is all Victor Wembanyama. And speaking of that, the Defensive Player of the Year award, I have been extremely torn on throughout the season. Even now, I still don't feel like either one of the two are necessarily 100% locked in, but I did decide to end up with Victor Wembanyama being my Defensive Player of the Year. I don't think it really matters what I have to say because Rudy Gobert is going to win the award from what is being reported on the betting odds as things currently stand. But it is a very interesting case, one that we've never really seen before because of some of these other factors, the absurd amount of steals and blocks that we see from Wemby, but also for him to be a rookie in contention with Rudy Gobert, who, like him or not, is going to be a Hall of Famer, primarily based on his defensive capabilities, has already won the award 3 times, is probably going to win it a 4th time this season, and it's no shame. Wemby is going to have his awards coming in the future, but as for why I myself picked Wembanyama in this case, there are some arguments that you can definitely make against Wemby that are glaring. Talking about availability, Gobert played almost 400 more minutes than Wemby did, played in more games, and availability is a massive thing when you're talking about a center being the defensive anchor of a team, and as a result, we saw Minnesota be the number 2 defense in opponents' points in the paint. San Antonio was 28th, and in large part that's due to some of the minutes restrictions and lack of other, key defenders on the floor with Wembanyama, that other teams were able to get to the rim a little bit more at will. History would show that a true Defensive Player of the Year can elevate a team's defense to being a top 5 unit. Since 2000, there have only been 2 Defensive Player of the Years to not be on a defense that was top 5 in defensive rating in the season. The Spurs were 21st, would significantly be the worst team to ever have, a worst defensive team to have a Defensive Player of the Year award winner. The Timberwolves were first on the other side. The diehard Wembanyama for Defensive Player of the Year crowd will point to the fact that the Spurs have a 105.8 rating with him on the court, which would be number 1 in the league. Now, that is a very arbitrary stat as well, considering the fact that Gobert has a defensive rating of 104.4, so he's even better. But again, I do think that the drastic improvement is sort of... I was looking at all these statistics and trying to find a way really to justify Gobert, because that's where I leaned for the majority of the season. And I might be in the wrong here, but everything points to Wembanyama now. Even still, if you can't tell, I'm still torn on the decision, but I went with Wembanyama because we have never seen a defender be able to impact all of these different things on a court so rapidly, so masterfully, especially early on in his career, being the deterrent that he is, and the way that he was really able to improve a Spurs defense. Again, when you look at the full season stats, they don't necessarily stand out for the Spurs defensively, but Wembanyama was an absolutely different player, and that was a different defense when he was on the court. And I think that Rudy Gobert is, of course, one of the greatest defenders in the modern era, but we are emerging into the Wembanyama era of he is going to win his share of Defensive Player of the Year for years to come. Most improved player, I have Coby White of the Chicago Bulls. I think in terms of a talent and being able to be going from sort of a bench player, a mediocre player, to being a legitimate productive part of the team, Coby White is the clear choice for me. He just signed a second contract with Chicago this past offseason that is worth about $12 million annually. And that seems like it is going to be a steal of a contract for the Bulls moving forward these next couple years. Having him at this discounted price. White was a rotational piece off the bench for a mediocre Bulls team through his first few seasons, and he ended up really emerging during that mid-season mark where Zach LaVine was ruled out for the remainder of the season. Now, he didn't fully carry that momentum with him, which ultimately, I think that little bit of a tail off in the consistency of it is what's going to cost him the award. But I do think, again, when you're talking about actually improving as an asset to a team, Coby White was the clear choice for me. Tyrese Maxey is going to win the award. He is the prohibitive favorite as things currently stand. I just don't really agree with it, considering the fact we knew that Tyrese Maxey was a very good player last year. He upped his points per game by 5. He upped his assists per game by a couple, but he also went from being the third option last season behind James Harden and Joel Embiid into a first option for most of this season, where Harden left and Joel Embiid was dealing with his meniscus injury. His efficiency went down. Now again, upped his points, upped his assists per game. I think that Maxey is a great player. I just feel like we already knew Maxey is a great player. And if you're going to give the award to somebody who was already notable, I would sort of lean with Jalen Brunson, the way that he was able to carry the Knicks to the season that he did, prove himself from not just being a solid player, a really nice player, but a legitimate number one option that can carry a team to a 50-win season. And the Knicks were dealing with all of these injuries along the way. He was still able to do so. Meanwhile, Philly, and again, not that this all falls on the shoulders of Maxey, but the 76ers were 16-27 without Embiid this season, meaning that Maxey wasn't able to fully put the team on his back, and not that he should have been necessarily. Obviously, the level of production was extremely hard to replace. That team in Philly definitely struggled a lot on the defensive side of the ball, especially once Embiid was gone. But again, I just don't really like what the award has turned into these past few years. I believe Ja Morant won it a few years ago. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was actually more deserved, even though I think he won it last year, but again, it's just sort of been, it feels like the NBA is just trying to push it out to more notable players as opposed to an actual most improved. Don't want to spend too much more time on this. Also, shout out Jalen Johnson, who probably would have gotten some more love for me, but he did not qualify for it this year. Sixth man of the year, I have Malik Monk. Monk got hurt with a knee injury at the end of April that kept him out for the last handful of games of the season, but he played in 72 this year. I feel like his level of creation off the bench was just so crucial for the Kings. The scoring ability himself, the playmaking, especially out of the pick and roll, helped to actually operate a functional offense in those bench minutes. And it wasn't just the bench minutes, but he was playing closing time for them as well. The runner-ups I would have here would be Naz Reid and Bobby Portis. I know that Reid has gained a lot of momentum for this award in the past few weeks. I mean, the way that he was able to step up and help the Timberwolves to not fall off when Karl Anthony Towns went down with injury is very significant in my eyes, and he definitely deserves credit. But at the same time, I do feel like when it comes to Naz Reid, he wasn't the one playing these closing minutes for Minnesota throughout the season for the most part. Monk was a six-man, but he was still playing starter minutes because that's what they saw him as one of their best players, but provided a spark off the bench. Naz Reid is also incredible. I've been a huge fan of him. That's why I didn't think that the Timberwolves were going to completely fall out of the picture when Cat went down, because I think that Naz Reid could be a starting center on an NBA team. I still feel like that. But in terms of sixth man of the year, Malik Monk is the creator, and he brings sort of the essence of this even more. I think he has a little bit lesser of the scoring, but more of the playmaking maybe than a Jamal Crawford, who is pretty much synonymous with the award. Wanted to give some love to Bobby Portis as well, who has also had a very nice season for himself. I believe he won last season as well. But Coach of the Year, I have Oklahoma City's Mark Daigneault. He was just named the Coaches Association Coach of the Year award winner last night. He will probably win the official award as well. Led the Thunder to becoming the youngest one seed in NBA history. They were just a very, overachieving team this season, and it's not that people didn't see this coming. There was a real chance that the Thunder were going to take this step. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander made first-team All-NBA last season. We saw the development of Jalen Williams from the second half of last season into this. They then got their rookie center in Chet Holmgren back, who missed all of last season. So it's not like this came out of nowhere necessarily, but the one seed to bring that home is very much impressive. There were a lot of very solid candidates for the award this season. The runner-ups I had to finish out my top three ballot were Chris Finch of Minnesota and Tom Thibodeau of New York. Finch being able to resurrect the Cat Gobert experiment, which could have flamed out as one of the worst deals in NBA history. May still not like the amount of value they gave up for, but at least they're now a playable team and should be for the next couple years. After last season it looked like a disaster, and then Thibodeau leading the Knicks to their first 50-win season since 2012-13 while dealing with all of these injuries to Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson and OG Anunoby. And on the note of Anunoby, they were shuffling players with trades from that deal with Toronto, as well as the Detroit deal, bringing in Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. But that is my complete set here of individual awards. Don't really care for Clutch Player of the Year award. It's going to be DeMar DeRozan. So be it. It's more of a statistical award, really, in my eyes. Steph Curry is also probably going to get some votes as well. But, again, I don't feel really too strongly about it enough to talk about it on the pod today. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into my all-NBA team selections. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are now headed into our second segment of the day. Just gave the All-NBA, just gave the individual player awards. Now we are going to be moving into the All-NBA teams and giving my picks for all of those. I want to start off with the first team, of course. Talked about this about a month or so ago when I did this exercise. I think that there are 4 locks for the first team. It is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic. Now, there has been a little bit of recent buzz in the past couple weeks of people wanting to kick Giannis out of the first team. Feel like this was really headlined on a national standpoint when Doris Burke was calling the Knicks-Bulls game on the final day of the regular season. I just think that you can't take Giannis off of this first team where he averaged 30 points per game while shooting 61% from the field. First time that has ever happened in NBA history. That feels like a stat that Wilt Chamberlain should have owned, and yet he was never able to do so. And for Giannis to put together another incredible season, I think that he's really without a doubt a top 3 player in the NBA in my eyes. And yes, the Bucks did underachieve a little bit, but they still won 49 games. There was all types of turnover, of course, with the coaching situation, with upending their real identity by trading Drew Holiday and bringing in Damian Lillard, trying to force themselves into more of an offensive-focused team. And there was just a lot of turmoil that went on. Also, they would have been the 2nd seed if it weren't for Giannis getting injured down the stretch of the year. So I just don't think that a 49-win season and a 3 seed is enough to disqualify the incredible year that Giannis put on this past season. I have Jason Tatum taking that 5th spot on the first team. He's the best player on the best regular season team this season. His scoring statistics are maybe a little bit lower, but he averaged a career high in assists per game based off the fact that he took a little bit of a backseat, making some sacrifices in order to help elevate the team. And they did so to the point where they won 64 games. If they hadn't had a 14-game lead over the 2 seed down the stretch, they would have won even more. But Tatum was able to still have a very solid statistical season with 27 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, and while doing so, had possibly his best season ever defensively. He's still the best rebounder on the Celtics in my eyes, and people that don't actually watch the games sort of downplay his importance to the organization, but he is what makes the Celtics operate the way that they do, the way that he is able to play this unselfish game. It trickles down from the top. I also feel like Tatum has increasingly improved as a playmaker over the past couple years, and as much as some of the, late in the shot clock, late in the game, the clutch numbers are definitely ugly for not just Tatum, but the entire team. Outside of that, I do think that his decision making has been much better as the years have gone on, and I just feel like, again, with the level of team success that the Celtics had this season as well, it is hard to overlook that. And really, the person that would be replacing him is the first name I'm going to have on the second team in Jalen Brunson. So it is, for me, Brunson, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Edwards, and Anthony Davis. I do feel really good about this set of names as well. I don't think that there's too much controversy in this set here, where Brunson, especially with the stretch of games that he had down the stretch of the season, was really building up some momentum to take that first team. I just didn't necessarily see it like that. Kevin Durant and Anthony Edwards could have possibly made that first team in the final spot as well. Durant was talked about for a bit there. Kawhi Leonard was even talked about as possibly being first team for a good chunk of the regular season. But so they all fall into this second team, which I feel good about. The biggest debate here probably surrounds what to do with the Lakers players in this situation. So I had Anthony Davis taking that final second team spot. I feel like he has to be rewarded for how impactful he's been this season, the effort on both sides of the ball. Obviously, LeBron, with the statistics he puts out on a nightly basis, it's hard to overlook that, of course, and not that I want to overlook it necessarily, and I don't think I am, but still the possession-to-possession level of effort, I feel like it makes sense that 39, 40 years old at this point, it makes sense that he doesn't necessarily feel the need to every single possession give his 100%. I feel like this is the most locked in we've seen Anthony Davis in years, and part of that is reflected by the fact that he played in 76 games this season, which is the most he has ever played in his career, in his age 30 season, which is something that's super encouraging to see. Like I mentioned, he is probably, when the NBA Awards officially host their show following the playoffs, or I forget exactly when it is. I feel like it's in June. But when that all comes out, Anthony Davis is probably going to be a finalist for his defensive capabilities this season, along with the fact that he again was able to be incredibly impactful at a level that we just haven't necessarily seen the consistency with him in some time. And you just love to see it from AD, and I think that he is definitely deserving of that final second team spot. So again, Brunson, Durant, Edwards, Kawhi, and AD shape up the second team for me. And then for the third team, I have Steph Curry, Devin Booker, Jaylen Brown, LeBron James, and Domantas Sabonis. LeBron, like I talked about, of course, another incredible season. I feel like, again, sort of to that same sort of conversation we were having with the second team, figuring out what to do with these Lakers teammates in LeBron and AD, considering the fact that they are two of the top 15 players in the league, and yet they are going to be in a play-in tournament game tonight, is maybe something that you have to take into consideration, but at the same time, I don't know how you can. And once LeBron really locked in for the second half of the season, there was all types of distractions during the first half with all the trade rumors that were coming out, with LeBron putting out all these cryptic messages about his teammates, about whether or not he wanted to be on the roster himself. There were, of course, all the trade rumors. Once he was fully bought in on this Lakers team, sort of like we saw last season, they were able to elevate their game once again. Now, they are currently the 8th seed and could ultimately miss the playoffs as a whole. I don't think that that's going to happen. I expect them to probably win against New Orleans tonight, even though I do think that they are underdogs. I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that I don't think we have an official ruling on what Anthony Davis's status for the night is. He was dealing with some back spasms at the time. LeBron and Anthony Davis are actually both listed as game time decisions as things currently stand. But again, all of this coming around, I feel like even with maybe a little bit of a disappointing regular season, it's still hard. I feel like with these 65 game qualifications, it does sort of eliminate a handful of other potential players who could have taken this spot from him. It really weeds out a lot of, again, those fringe All-NBA players, leaving the space for LeBron here. Steph Curry, kind of hard to... I don't think anybody really can argue that he's not one of the 15 best players in the NBA. He puts on another fantastic statistical season while dealing with all types of nonsense in the Warriors organization, mostly surrounded by the whole Draymond Green situation and him getting himself ejected and suspended, but helping to bring along a lot of this youth talent as well, dealing with the Klay Thompson on and off of the bench situation, him not fully being able to, understand what his role is until that final stretch of the season. Steph Curry kept them alive throughout the year, and again, he's without a doubt one of the 15 best players in the NBA. I would say the same thing about Devin Booker as well. The fact that you can look at the Suns' record, and yeah, they had disappointing stretches, but even still, they were a very solid team this year. Talked about this a bunch, but a 49-win team, I feel like it is definitely not out of the realm of possibility, especially when you have the Lakers, who I just put in another All-NBA, a second All-NBA award winner as well, that I don't think that Devin Booker is egregious. Domantas Sabonis, the season he had with the double-doubles, with the playmaking that we've seen, being the best rebounder in the league, and, I do think that the Kings deserve some sort of recognition here. Third team is fully fair in my eyes, but last pick here is the one I probably had the most struggles with, and I decided to go with Jaylen Brown. Now, Zion Williamson did get some heavy consideration for me. I alluded to it throughout the past month or so of the regular season that Zion was building up a lot of momentum to potentially steal one of those spots. I do feel like you have to take into some consideration the fact that he was so inconsistent and out of shape during the first couple months of the season, that you had the outrageous Stephen A. Smith comments and the way that the whole national media sort of turned their back on Zion. And since then, Zion has worked his way back into shape, and he's been incredible. There's just a level of inconsistency. I think if the Pelicans were able to secure a top 6 seed, things possibly could have been different. But I went with Jaylen Brown, who isn't having necessarily career highs in points similar to the Tatum point. I just believe that there is some level of, these players knew that they had to sacrifice some to make the team as the best possible team during the regular season, and that's what they did. He also had a extreme level of buy-in on the defensive side of the ball that was sort of lost over recent seasons, where he came into the NBA as a very plus defender, but sort of the lack of attentiveness. He was getting beat off backdoor cuts and such, and was getting caught ball watching. He has never been more locked in for the defensive side of the ball. There were some talks about him potentially making an all-defensive team. I don't think that that is the case. At least I don't have it that way. But his defense absolutely does deserve to be credited, along with the fact that he is averaging a very efficient 23 points per game as well. And again, I want to mention that a lot of this does have to do with the fact that you had some key players who were unable to qualify for the awards because of the fact that they didn't reach the 65 game threshold, which was a big deal in a lot of these cases. I feel like maybe one of the more controversial picks that I don't have is Tyrese Halliburton. Tyrese had a phenomenal start to the season, really, and established himself as one of the up-and-coming point guards. I've been a big fan of Tyrese Halliburton for a handful of years now, but during the second half of the season, there was really a dramatic fall-off that I feel like just hurt him to a level that the Pacers weren't necessarily as relevant at the time, and he was seeing a big-time shooting slump, so ultimately, I don't go with him. But final list of the teams here. First team, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, and Jason Tatum. Second team, I have Jalen Brunson, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Edwards, and Anthony Davis. And then third team, I have Steph Curry, Devin Booker, Jaylen Brown, LeBron James, and Domantas Sabonis. But let me know what you would have changed in the comment section. For now, we are going to be taking our second break of the show, and when we come back, we are going to dive into some all-defense and all-rookie teams. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our third segment of the day. Going to be diving into the All-NBA defensive and rookie teams. Without further ado, we're going to start with defense here. Now, I want to preface that this is the first year that I think it's first year, could be second, that these awards, these teams, I should say, are positionless. So it would be very easy to just fill up these teams with 4 or 5 rim players, as they do typically have the most impact on defense. I definitely took it into consideration to some degree that they're, again, the most impactful players in the NBA are defense. I tried to show some level of love to guards and wings. That being said, I have 3 big men on my first team, but it is just sort of an interesting debate. Let me know how you feel about it in the comments section. But again, I tried to sort of steer away from going all big men in this one, and I think that I found a decent balance, but let me know what you think on that as well. For my first team, I went with Alex Caruso, Herb Jones, Anthony Davis, Victor Wembanyama, and Rudy Gobert. Wembanyama and Gobert are pretty much no doubt here. Obviously, the top 2 candidates for Defensive Player of the Year award, I would imagine they're going to be top 2 on the ballots when we get the final results over voting. Anthony Davis is one that I had some consideration of whether or not I wanted to include him on the first team. The reality is he did have the 3rd best defensive season in the NBA this past year, And I did have a little bit of a hard time. When I first sat down to sort of go through all of this, I sort of assumed, okay, well, 2 bigs is probably the level as far as I'm going to go in terms of those first team selections. But ultimately, I just felt like it wasn't right to not include Anthony Davis on the first team. Now, if you personally feel that that is cheating a little bit, I don't know what to tell you. They did just change the rules on that, but curious to see what everybody thinks in terms of that. But Alex Caruso and Herb Jones are the other two. I included a guard and a forward. Herb Jones is somebody who I don't think is ever going to get real consideration for Defensive Player of the Year, but I absolutely love his game. And it starts with his defensive capabilities. Yes, he's emerged as a solid 3-and-D player as well, but I just feel like there might not be, outside of Jonathan Isaac, who actually did not qualify for this because of games played, somebody that, Jonathan Isaac could have potentially made one of these 2 teams if he had more games played under his belt. But outside of that, I think that Herb Jones is just about the best defender on the perimeter in the NBA. Absolute difference maker, and I couldn't omit him from this one. I feel like I would have to imagine that Herb Jones is going to be first team in this situation. I have a hard time imagining that the entire NBA media is going to sort of discredit him in that sense, but would be an absolute shame if he wasn't at least first team. He just has to make one of these 2 teams as well. Alex Caruso, we see some of the effort levels with him and the ability to, even when he was dealing with the injuries down the end of the season where he had a foot injury, he was just time and time again making these hustle plays and sort of was the heart of this Bulls team. Obviously DeMar DeRozan as well, for the leadership and offense he could bring to the team, but Alex Caruso on a nightly basis taking the hardest possible assignment and doing a phenomenal job with it. Was hard to omit him. Now, he was probably the one on this first team list that I sort of volleyed back and forth with. I think that there were some other guards that could have slid into consideration, but I ended up going with Caruso for the first team. And on the second team, I have Derek White, Drew Holiday, Jalen Suggs, Jaden McDaniels, and Bam Adebayo. Bam is another one. If you felt like going, big man heavy on these teams now that they are positionless, I can't say you're necessarily wrong for putting him on the first team either, but I didn't think that for Anthony Davis, like I said, Wemby, Gobert pretty much locks for first team. For Anthony Davis, I felt a level of guilt not including him on that first team because he was so tremendous. Bam Adebayo, I respect a ton. I think that he goes actually a little bit under the radar in terms of the respect he gets from national media, but I felt like the second team was very fair for him. He is one of the best defenders in the NBA, and ultimately that is where I decided to go with that. Now, Derek White, Drew Holiday, 2 Celtics. I really didn't feel great about that, but I also, when it comes to these all-NBA discussions, I feel like it can get, very dicey in terms of necessarily the impact. And maybe it was that I watch more Celtics games, admittedly, than anybody else. That's why I don't, officially have a vote here. But so I'm acknowledging some level of bias, but I also don't think it's any means of a stretch putting these 2 where they are. Derek White, the block and steal numbers for him, it's very interesting. The fact that Drew Holiday was just selected to the Team USA team. I know that maybe it's not the most eye-popping name on the list of players there, but Adam Lefkoe of TNT went on the Ryan Russillo podcast a couple weeks ago, and he talked about his experience with, of course, basketball head coaching legend Jay Wright, who was with Villanova, and he has some experience with Team USA. And he said that Jay Wright told him when it comes to building this Team USA roster, it starts with Jrue Holiday because of sort of the identity and the defensive prowess that he brings that just can't be overlooked. So I did go 2 Celtics on this. Again, probably some of my least confident picks. I would probably lean Derek White over Jrue Holiday if you were to take one of the 2 out. And then Jalen Suggs, Jaden McDaniels, 2 players that had tremendous seasons. Jalen Suggs really sort of, coming from the depths of the Orlando, I wouldn't call him a bench player necessarily, but there was a lot of people that were out on Suggs after he was drafted. I believe it was the 5th overall pick in 2021, and he was able to turn himself into a solidified starter this past season, and it was in large part due to the fact that he was able to bring that defensive energy and, yes, add a 3-point shot as far as, offensively as well. But Suggs is one of the hardest working defenders in the NBA. Seems like he's willing to lose a limb if it means that the opposing team is going to miss a shot. So had to recognize Suggs there, and then everybody sort of acknowledges how good Jaden McDaniels is defensively as well. I guess omissions, maybe one of the biggest ones is Jarrett Allen. I know that, again, when we're talking about the big man position here, it is easy to sort of lean in that direction. Jarrett Allen had an incredible season once again. I think that he's another player that really goes under the radar in terms of the respect that he gets from the national media. I already had 4 big men on the list so far, and maybe if you wanted to take out one of those Celtics guards and potentially slide Allen in there, I wouldn't say that that is a wrong move necessarily, but that is my all defensive list. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section. Again, first team, Alex Caruso, Herb Jones, Anthony Davis, Victor Wembanyama, and Rudy Gobert. Second team, Derek White, Jrue Holiday, Jalen Suggs, Jaden McDaniels, and Bam Adebayo. But now the all-rookie teams, this one, again, was a little bit difficult because outside of the top, I feel like, and this happens a lot with rookie classes, there's flashes of potential, but the consistency isn't always there. And, especially when you're looking at that second team, you sort of are looking at a lot of average play, and feel like it's a little bit gut reaction to some degree in terms of picking some of these rookies over another, but I tried to do my best. First team, I had Brandon Podziemski, Brandon Miller, Derek Lively, Victor Wembanyama, and Chet Holmgren. Wemby, Holmgren, and Miller are pretty much no question. They're going to be the finalists for the Rookie of the Year award. All had incredible seasons. Brandon Podziemski has made an argument for even being an all-defensive caliber player. I'm sure he's going to receive some votes, so if you even would maybe want to slide him into one of those guard spots that I put on the all-defensive team, you could make an argument for it as well. But Podziemski, the way that he has been able to really make a difference for this Warriors team in keeping them afloat, especially when Klay Thompson was dealing with his struggles. Podziemski, I know he was for the majority of the season, but in terms of charges drawn, I know that he was up there at the top for the majority of the season. I would imagine he is still up there to some degree, but I don't know if I have final numbers on that in front of me right now. Derek Lively, also somebody who really surprised me. I wasn't too familiar with his game at Duke. Clearly there was a struggle with that Duke team last year in terms of the spacing, and now that Lively can fit into this system, he is the perfect big to put with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving for the ability to be a much better defender from day one than I ever really expected. Got himself into foul trouble a little bit early on, but outside of that was able to work through it. And then on offense, super hard screener, absolutely electric lob threat in the pick and roll game. So That is my first team. Second team, I have Keontae George, GG Jackson, Cason Wallace, Amen Thompson, and Jaime Jaquez Jr. So I went a little big heavy on the first team. Definitely not so much on this second team. Keontae George, been a massive fan of him since he was at Baylor. Had a really nice season in Utah. I feel like I heard the argument of him versus Scoot Henderson, who I did not have on either of these teams. Their statistics are very similar. You could also maybe, based off of games played and such, put Scoot in for GG Jackson, but I just feel like Keontae George did a really nice job at moments this year, stepping up in those big moments, being able to lead a team himself and be an alpha. That's along with being an incredible passer. He was really reliable through the stretch of the whole season, where Scoot, it felt like the first, we were going into the All-Star break, and Scoot was horrendous efficiency-wise and was still really coming into his own, struggling with being the point guard in this situation as a whole. Feel like that's probably not what he's going to have to be necessarily full-time. He has Anthony Simons next to him in Portland. Gonna see how that necessarily works out. But as for the rest here, GG Jackson, one of the steals of the draft, still incredibly young and has put on some massive scoring performances, especially during the second half of the season. Cason Wallace, one of the less talked about Oklahoma City young pieces, but he comes in, plays all 82 games for them this season, along with Chet Holmgren, by the way. Again, that Thunder team was really positioned well with that hunger and the buy-in from at least a regular season standpoint to put together the season they did was impressive. Amen Thompson, during the second half of the season, also really got his offense going. We knew he had the defensive and the rebounding capabilities, but once he started being able to adapt to even still not having the most prolific three-point shot in the NBA, was very solid in the mid-range, actually, granted with maybe a little bit of a smaller frequency, but Thompson able to sort of find his way in this Houston team even without ever really developing that three-point shot, which I thought was impressive. Jaime Jaquez Jr. as well was one of the front runners for, I wouldn't say Rookie of the Year, but, he came on really hot during the start of the season. Then we saw his efficiency scoring-wise drop down each month of the season until it was about March, where he sort of started going back up on the right trend, and he's going to be a very solid pro. He clearly brings that level of experience after playing a handful of years at UCLA, being on some really good teams there, and now Miami is going to be leaning on him in the playoffs this upcoming year, so we will see. Again, no Scoot Henderson for me, as much as it did hurt me to do so. I also did not put in Trace Jackson Davis, who I know is sort of a fan favorite, but in terms of what they were asked to do and sort of the flashes, I didn't think he necessarily fit in with the rest of the 10. So again, one last recap: Brandon Podziemski, Brandon Miller, Derek Lively, Victor Wembanyama, and Chet Holmgren on the first team. Keontae George, GG Jackson, Cason Wallace, Amen Thompson, and Jaime Jaquez Jr. on the second team. But we are going to be taking our final break of the show now, and when we come back on the other side, want to finish out the show by talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo's injury and the updates surrounding his status headed into the playoffs. So stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the show. We are going to be, sort of as the playoffs approach, talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo and his injury status. He, of course, went down with a non-contact calf injury on his left leg that he's been dealing with a couple various injuries, including some hamstring, and I believe he briefly missed with a calf as well. Since the start of March, and now he is officially expected to not be ready for the start of the Bucks' first round matchup against the Indiana Pacers, which does hurt them. The Pacers are a team that are young and hungry and have really come on this past season and have given the Bucks some trouble in their matchups where, again, I feel like I say this all the time now, regular season series have never meant less in the NBA in terms of how it projects for the postseason, and the Bucks still have loads more experience than the Pacers do. Pacers, really outside of Pascal Siakam, who was a mid-season acquisition, don't have anybody on the roster that is a part of a real NBA playoffs run. So, as for Milwaukee, they definitely are vulnerable. I think the Pacers, even with a fully healthy Giannis, were at risk of being upset, and now this just gives that much more of an edge to the Indiana Pacers. I actually want to look up what the series odds are, because I would imagine that the Bucks are still favored, but at the same time, I would not be surprised whatsoever if this is much closer to even. We've seen a handful of these series that are already being put out there as far as who is favored. We know the 6-seeded Suns are favored over the Timberwolves. The 5-seeded Mavericks are favored over the Clippers. So should be very interesting to see here. Yeah, the odds definitely dropped, because I think the last time I looked, the Bucks were something along the lines of minus 250, and now they are minus 135 after this news comes out. So we will see how this plays out. Giannis's calf strain, it's an injury that typically the recovery period is about 2 to 3 weeks. Now, Giannis, of course, is a massive human being, which does definitely play a role in the recovery time in all of this. We don't have, I don't think, the exact date in terms of when the Bucks are tipping off. Maybe we do, but it is going to be a playoff series that tips off either 11 or 12 days after Giannis suffered this injury. So, going to be interesting to see. We've talked about this just about every time we've talked about Giannis and this injury, is the fact that Kevin Durant, somebody who has very similar size, maybe not necessarily weight-wise, but at least with height, he forced himself to come back a little bit earlier in the 2019 playoffs and ended up missing the entire 2020 season as a result of a torn Achilles on that same leg. For Milwaukee here, this season has been filled with turmoil for them, and you obviously, especially after being upset by Miami in the first round last year, there's going to be an extreme level of pressure to succeed. And with Giannis specifically, we have seen him be able to recover from these injuries at a very remarkable speed, to be able to, his injury that he suffered in the 2021 playoffs against the Hawks, to come back for the finals, and even last year when he was dealing with his injury and sort of toughed it out as much as he could. And this Bucks organization, like I talked about yesterday, is under extreme amounts of pressure in my eyes because of the fact that they decided to fire Mike Budenholzer just a couple seasons after he won them the finals in 2021, and they moved on from Drew Holiday to find an upgrade, in at least what they thought, in Damian Lillard. This adds an extra level of pressure to Lillard, who, again, like I said, I think it might be a little bit unfair at this point with Lillard being 34 years old to have his legacy be determined by a series like this. But for, some degree to the amount of buy-in that the Bucks did to, go in and grab a Damian Lillard, this is where he's supposed to step up in these types of moments. So we will see how this all plays out. I do feel like this is going to be a very important stretch of games here for the Bucks. Obviously they're playoff games, but in terms of how the organization is viewed, because there's a chance that this doesn't work out for them. This could be a series that could end. I mean, realistically, if Giannis isn't going to play in this game as a whole, if the Pacers won and call it 6 games, I wouldn't be shocked necessarily. I believe, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how many games it took for Miami to knock out the Bucks last year. I feel like it was in 5, but it would not be shocking to me if the Pacers, who are this, up and coming team, definitely aren't scared of Milwaukee based off of how the regular season's played out. I think they won 4 of 5 matchups against the Bucks this year, and they are going to be, all in for this. Outside of the Benedict Mathurin injury, they are just about fully healthy here. Yesterday we talked about the idea of which, young player is going to come out and grab national headlines, even just with a hot start in the first round. I feel like Tyrese Halliburton could absolutely be a candidate for that type of national media attention, because really when he was garnering all that attention earlier in the year, it was when he led the Pacers to a win over the Bucks during the play-in tournament in that knockout round. So it's very possible that the Pacers could end up embarrassing the Bucks here a little bit, and where things go from there, I'm not totally sure. I believe that after this season, there is only 1 year left on Damian Lillard's contract. I know Stephen A. Smith was talking about the fact that Lillard wants out and that he isn't going to want to stay there long term. It looks like he does have just one last year on his contract after this. And if you know that he's not going to re-sign, I mean, I feel like it's tough to sort of move on fully from Lillard because they're still bought in for a championship or bust, essentially, as these next years go on. I think he actually might also have a player option in the 2026-27 season. They might have given him a contract extension. SpotRack, the website I use for the 4-player contracts, added this whole new other upcoming contract extension feature that is a little bit more complicated for me, but it does seem like he actually might be through 2025-26 and then have a player option. So yeah, I don't know. Stephen A. Smith has been talking about the idea of the Bucks should trade him if he's not happy there. I feel like they're just in no way going to get the same level of return in terms of value that they gave up in the first place. So, especially with Lillard, who spent so much of his career in Portland sort of putting off the demanding out in a trade, I feel like it would be sort of uncharacteristic of him to do so next year. But I just feel like in terms of making this trade count that they did to go and get Damian Lillard, he is going to need to step up in this moment and in this series for as long as Giannis is not able to be there. And I think the other person who this really comes as an inflection point for their legacy, is Doc Rivers, where he's been very heavily criticized throughout the course of the season after the Bucks got off to this hot start and Adrian Griffin, this rookie head coach, ends up getting fired. Rivers, who has had a pretty bumpy stretch over the past few years in the postseason, he ends up taking the job, and the team staggers from a regular season perspective. Again, there were flashes of their defense getting better and them looking like more of a legitimate contender coming out of specifically the All-Star break, but has been very rocky since then as well, and I do feel like it's going to be very difficult to try and overcome this Pacers team, who has the fastest paced offense in the league this season, and a Bucks team that has not been exceptional on defense, especially in transition. So I don't know what he is going to be able to sort of apply in this series that's going to right their wrongs, but it is a very interesting conversation, and there's a lot of legacies I feel like somewhat on the line for the Bucks moving forward here. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We run from 2 to 3 Eastern every weekday, so you can catch us again tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Follow us on socials as well. But we will see you tomorrow afternoon. Have a good one.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn.